Okay, I'm gonna attempt to show you how to add tattoos to, in this case, an anime picture. Um, this is actually my first tutorial, so it may not be the best one out there, but I'm gonna see what I can do. Anyways, you just start with whatever picture you're gonna do. Actually, we're gonna start with the black and white one because it's easier. Basically, if you're starting with a pre-made tattoo like this one, just make sure that the background is completely gone, like no white or anything like that. That way it's just the tattoo, and you just start by moving it over to our picture, and make sure that it's on a different layer. Right here you can rename it to like whatever the tattoo is, or however you want to do it, whatever best helps you remember what layer is what's on what layer. But we're gonna take and transform it, and I use the Control T for the shortcut for free transform, but you can go up to edit and free transform and find it there. But just scale it down and make sure you hold shift to be able to keep the proportions right. That way it doesn't come out looking all weird and screwed up. And then just take and rotate it however you want, to however you want the tattoo to actually look. And then zoom in so you can see better. It makes it easier to work on. I'm going to put it down a little bit closer than that. And just make sure you have it in place where you want it, or pretty close. And from here, to keep it from looking as sharp as it is right now with it being from a pre-made picture, just come up here to filter, blur, and either blur or blur more depending on the picture, but this one I'm just going to use blur. And it just softens up the edges a little bit right there. But basically from here you're going to go up to edit and transform and warp. What this does is it lets you kind of distort the tattoo itself so it actually looks like it's part of the body and not just painted on there. And just kind of play around with it until you get it the way that you want it. And you can kind of mess around, practice a little without it on a picture, just until you get whatever you want. And it takes practice to get used to it. I still have a little bit of trouble with it sometimes, but it just takes a little practice, just like anything that you do to get better. And once you have it the way that you want it, then you just hit enter to set the transformation, and then just move it into place to where you want the tattoo to actually be. And from here, go over to your blending options, which is right by the opacity on your layers, and either put it on multiply or linear burn. I personally like linear burn because it just looks better and more dynamic to me, but you can do either one. But just select that and then go over to your opacity and lessen it down. You can take and just lessen it by doing this, or I normally just work by typing in, but you can set it to 80 or whatever you want it to be. If you want it to look more faded, you can set it to a lower opacity, but just however you want it to look. This just makes it look like it's not quite so dark and painted, and it just keeps that natural feel to the tattoo. And then from here, I use my polygonal lasso tool to do this next step. Some people use the magnetic lasso or even the freehand lasso. I don't like either one of them because they're too difficult. The magnetic lasso just doesn't cooperate very well, and then the freehand, you've got to have a really super awesome steady hand to use it, and I don't. But if you don't have it selected, just hold down your left click and it brings up this window and you can select it from there. But just zoom in, and what you're going to do here is you're just going to select the, if it cooperates, you're going to just select the area that you want the tattoo to actually be on. And normally you can sit there and hide your layer to make it easier to see. I mean, it just depends on your preference. And you don't have to be completely precise. It helps to be pretty close to right on the lines. And if you need to zoom in closer, you can. Just whatever's in your comfort zone. Actually, I will hide it, make it easier on this next part. But just select the area that the tattoo is actually meant to be on, where you want it to be. And this ensures the fact that you have the tattoo exactly where you want it and not just in some random place or it going all haywire on you. And normally this takes a little bit, like my Photoshop didn't want to cooperate with me there like normal. Trying to get it to where it'll cooperate. And this can be a little time consuming. Some people use their eraser tool. I don't like it because the annoyance of changing brushes to make sure you get the right brush size and don't erase too much, just little things like that. But if it's in your comfort zone, just do whatever's really in your comfort zone. But I find that they come out looking better when you use the lasso. And there goes my Photoshop again being my meanie. They just don't seem to like me tonight. Hopefully it'll let me get through this. And hopefully it won't make this too horrible of a tutorial. And what I'm doing here to be able to subtract from the selection, I'm just holding down the Alt key or pressing it to get that subtraction selection if you ever have this problem. Or you can hold Shift to add to the selection. I automatically have it set to do that because of how much I work in portioned selections. But just make your tattoo layer visible again, and from here you don't want it to actually take away from where you want the tattoo. So in this case we're going to invert the selection, and you can go up to select and inverse right here, or you can just use the shortcut which is Control Shift I, which is what I do. And you'll see the little dotted lines around here and around your selection showing that it just went to everything outside of where you selected. And then you're just going to cut the selection, whatever's in it, which in this case is the tattoo everywhere we don't want it to be. You can go up to edit and cut, or just use the shortcut which is Control X. And then from there it puts your tattoo exactly where you want it to be. You can go back in and double check and make sure it didn't cut away too much, which right there it looks like it might have. And just get it to where you just, wherever it is you like it. It doesn't have to be perfectly precise, but it helps make it look better. if you can tell from the areas that I went back to and the areas I didn't, just as a little example. But there's your tattoo, like a black and white tattoo. And it's a little bit different for color tattoos because you got to do a little more with duplicating layers, which is actually what I'll show you next. Just make it easier and get everything all in the same. Just go about the same way that you did with your black tattoo. And you want to make sure you don't bring up that one if you're renaming. And you don't always have to rename. I normally don't, but I'm doing it for the sake of this tutorial. And right here I'm showing you the other way of being able to free transform without using the shortcuts, but normally I use the shortcuts. And you can resize it however you want it to be, if you want it to be over the entire arm or not, just however you want it to be. In this case it looks better smaller, so we'll go smaller. Be easier to edit again, but you just go up to edit and transform and warp again and do the same thing you did with your black and white tattoo, and just make sure that you have it going with the curves of the natural curves of the body. Again, just play around with it. It takes a little bit of practice, a little bit of messing with it, but you'll eventually get it the more that you work with it. And then once you have it like that, then again go over to your blending options. Actually, you want to make sure that you have it blurred. That way it doesn't look quite as sharp and crisp and everything the way that you did with your black tattoo or black and white tattoo, however. But go over to your blending options again, just like the other. And in this case it's a lot darker, so you want to go down to the opacity, go down really low. I mean, you don't have to go down that low, but normally 25 is a good starting place. And in this case, you're going to right click and duplicate the layer. Make sure your opacity is set back up to 100 before changing the blending option. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. But then just change your blending option to either overlay or soft light, whichever one looks better to you. And then you can go back and change the opacity of your linear burn layer, your base layer of the tattoo, where it looks a little bit darker, just however you want it to look. We'll do 55 for now. And then just take again and select either where your tattoo is supposed to be and inverse it, or in this case, if my Photoshop will stop being gay, just take and select the outside part where it's not meant to be. And then in this case, with you having multiple layers of the same tattoo, instead of using the cut feature, then we're going to just use the backspace on the keyboard to just clear the area. That way it doesn't take your selection away, but it still gets rid of the unwanted part of the tattoo. So just use your backspace or your little back arrow key, however it looks on your keyboard, just to clear the area, and then Control D to deselect, or up here and deselect, however you want to do it. But that gets you your tattoo, your color tattoo, and that's just basically how it works for adding a tattoo to an anime picture. And you can do this for multiple tattoos. You can do it even for Photoshop brushes, the different kinds of brushes, depending on what you want. I mean, it works the same way. You don't really have to do it. Like, you can go in with your pre-made Photoshop brush and just add it, and you just do the same thing, edit and transform. Just make sure that you are on a different layer and just warp it the same way you do with your others. I mean, you don't have to use pre-made Photoshop brushes. I tend to like to, because you don't really have to use the blur filter. And you can just take and have it like that and move it wherever it looks best. I mean, you can use the blur, make it look a little smoother, and do the same thing with your linear burn. Normally it's not needed, but just kind of do the same thing, and that way it's turns out just the same. And if you want it darker, you can make it darker, or you can make it a lighter tattoo where it doesn't really show up as much. Just whatever your preference is. But that's about it. That's how you add tattoos using pre-made pictures, whether they're black and white or color, or a pre-made brush. So there you go. Have fun.